Ahsoka finale episode 8 has finally been dropped, and we need to break it down because there is a lot going on in this episode. So let's get straight into it. We begin the episode with Thrawn getting ready to depart, and we learn that since episode 7, the cargo transfer has been completed. Thrawn orders 2 TIE fighters to destroy the Jedi transport, and Morgan confidently tells him that there is nothing the Jedi can do now to stop them. To which Thrawn says,
I've watched many an imperial officer make the same assumptions about the rebellion.
And if you've watched the Rebels show, this is definitely the case. There have been so many instances where Thrawn's plans have been thwarted simply because other Imperial officers underestimated the Rebels, a mistake that Thrawn seems pretty keen on not making this time round. Morgan Elsbeth receives her reward for finding Thrawn and the Great Mothers, and we get our first real look at some nightsister magic in action. And Morgan's transformation is pretty spooky. She seems to get burned by these green flames, which are characteristic of nightsister magic, and we see that her eyes have turned black, much like the Great Mothers, who have also embraced the dark magic. The Mothers then summon what is known as the Blade of Talzin, and this is in reference to another former Great Mother that we know of, Mother Talzin. Mother Talzin was of course the former leader of the Nightsisters in the Star Wars galaxy and was finally killed during a final showdown with the Sith. It's also worth mentioning that we have in fact seen this particular sword in action before in the Clone Wars when Mother Talzin faced off against Mace Windu. We cut to the Jedi providing escort for the Noti, and we see Ezra building his own lightsaber. Ezra and Huyang argue about how to build a lightsaber, which is rather amusing considering that Huyang is supposed to be the expert on this subject. But it also lends to the idea that because Ezra was raised as a Jedi outside of the Order, he is going to do things very differently, at least different to how the Jedi Order might have previously done things. We learned that Huyang previously taught Ezra's master Kanan Jarrus, but Huyang refers to Kanan as Caleb, which was Kanan's original name. And it would only be after the fall of the Jedi Order that Caleb decided to pick up and adopt the name Kanan. And it's interesting to see both Ezra and Sabine wonder at just how old Huyang is, and I think there is a greater sense of respect once they realize how much history he possessed.
Many years I have been on this ship, teaching many a Jedi before you, and I will continue teaching many a Jedi after you. Call me what you want, but inside my memory banks, I contain a record of every lightsaber ever made.
Huyang hands Ezra an emitter and explains that this is the sister piece to the emitter that Kanan had, and if you've watched the Rebels show, you will immediately recognize its iconic shape. So now Ezra has a lightsaber of his own, which mirrors that of his master, and one that symbolizes Ezra's continuing his master's legacy. Ezra ignites and his blade is blue, which is also the same color as his master's. We also then learned that a key reason as to why Ahsoka didn't want to continue training Sabine was how the Purge of Mandalore affected her, which really stems from Ahsoka's fear that Sabine's anger and hate would drive her to the dark side, much like how Anakin's emotion led to his downfall. And Ezra's reaction to all this is much more impactful once you realize that Ezra has met Sabine's entire family before in the Rebels show. And so him only realizing now after so many years makes this particular realization even more devastating. Sabine recognizes the importance of masters and by extension her master Ahsoka, and we then get a conversation between the two where they essentially make amends. Sabine apologizes to Ahsoka and Ahsoka responds with,
No.
Which is a moment that really echoes Han and Leia's moment on Cloud City.
I love you.
I know.
Ahsoka then goes on to talk about how she has had to make many difficult choices over her lifetime and mentions that despite all this, Anakin has always stood by her side. And this is indeed true. No matter what Ahsoka did, Anakin has always stood by her, especially when no one believed her when she was accused of bombing the Jedi Temple. And Ahsoka choosing not to get upset over Sabine's decision is in fact a reflection of her choosing to accept Anakin's teachings instead of an outright rejection of everything he stands for because of his eventual downfall. Ahsoka asks if Sabine has kept up with her training, and she initially responds that she tries, but she quickly changes her answer to,
I do.
which is an echo of Yoda's teaching to Luke on Dagobah as well.
Do or do not. There is no try.
TIE fighters attack the group and the ship is critically damaged, but Sabine is able to pull off one last trick before it goes down. Meanwhile, Enoch reports to Thrawn about the TIE fighter attack, and Thrawn tells him to mark the TIE captain for a citation, which is a key characteristic of Thrawn, rewarding his subordinates when they have done a good job and promoting those who actually deserve it. unlike the usual political scheming Imperials do to rise up the ranks. Thrawn, knowing that Ahsoka and the other Jedi will not give up so easily, preps for a ground assault. Again, another moment where Thrawn is a villain smart enough to recognize that this situation is far from over, essentially preempting that Ahsoka's next best option would be to attack the fortress directly. Morgan briefs the group of night troopers prepared to defend the fortress, and we learn that these guys are actually volunteers. Morgan tells Thrawn that they are all aware of the sacrifice needed of them, and that they are willing to do so in the name of Thrawn. And I think this part is what makes Thrawn so scary, is that he's able to inspire this level of devotion and fanaticism among those that work for him, to the point where they're willing to sacrifice themselves for his cause, which is a trait that not many other Star Wars villains are capable of doing. Ahsoka and the rest make their way to the fortress, and we get this really cool moment where Thrawn rains down hellfire, and this scene is somewhat reminiscent of his bombardment of the rebels at Atollon and Lothal. And there's a great piece of acting where we see Thrawn's frustration that the Jedi are still able to make it through, just a small crack in the calm veneer that he normally puts on. As Ahsoka and the rest face off against the night troopers, if you slow down the footage, one of the troopers actually makes an ungodly dodge to one of the deflected lasers, while on the other side, we see Sabine get hit in the face by a laser, which makes sense as her force abilities are considerably lower compared to Ezra and Ahsoka. The team changed tactics, with Sabine switching to her blasters, and I have to say that it's a really satisfying moment to see Ezra using his lightsaber again. But everything ends a little too easy, and the Great Mothers use their dark magic to revive the troopers, which isn't really anything new considering that we knew that the Nightsisters have this ability, and most of us were predicting some form of necromancy way beforehand. But what is really interesting is actually how resilient these guys are compared to the Nightsister zombies. These guys are able to take blaster hits and some lightsaber slashes and still keep going, which really makes them a much more formidable force than I previously speculated. On top of that, these zombies are also able to use blasters, demonstrating way more of a threat compared to the Nightsister zombies who randomly charged at the enemy head first. And this could be due to the fact that the combined magic of the three Great Mothers is far more powerful than what we've seen before, where it was only one Great Mother who was casting the spell. And so, if these undead troopers are capable of functioning closer to that of a normal living being, but still be much more resilient to attacks, then Thrawn has now some serious muscle behind his campaign moving forward. Thrawn tells Morgan Elsbeth that he now needs her to stay behind to delay the advancing Jedi, and in the background we can see two Death Troopers standing at the ready. Thrawn says for the Empire, but Morgan responds with, allowing us to finally understand what she was really trying to achieve all this time, which is the revival of Dathomir following the Separatists conducted genocide. Thrawn faces off against Elsbeth in a duel reminiscent of their first meeting, but this time the fight is a lot more difficult, and we get to see some great fast-paced action and smooth choreography between the two. Sabine and Ezra face off against the Death Troopers, and we soon learn that these guys have also been resurrected by the Great Mothers, hence why they're able to withstand lightsaber and blaster attacks. We even get a close-up shot of what little remains behind the mask, and it's a little ironic that we see an undead Death Trooper, as prior to Nightsister magic, there were always rumors that Death Troopers were developed using necrotic tissue. And so now with some Nightsister magic, those stories have actually come true. Sabine finally manages to use the Force to save herself, and Ezra decapitates the other. Ezra makes it onto Thrawn's ship using Sabine's help, but Sabine is forced to stay behind to help Ahsoka. Ahsoka loses a lightsaber, but she manages to kill Morgan in the end. After finding out that Morgan is dead, Thrawn orders the fortress to be destroyed in one last effort to delay the Jedi. Ahsoka and Sabine try their best to chase Thrawn, and Thrawn reaches out over the comms, and Thrawn essentially uses this opportunity to gloat a little and shake up Ahsoka by letting her know that he is aware of who she is and who Anakin was. Thrawn refers to her as a Ronin, and this is a Japanese term for a masterless samurai, often considered to be a wanderer. But there is a double meaning behind this, as the term was also used in Star Wars Visions, where the Ronin was a former Jedi who defied Jedi rules and ended up creating the Sith. So effectively, Thrawn is calling Ahsoka homeless before zipping into hyperspace and leaving them behind, essentially sealing his victory in the end. Ahsoka and Sabine return to Paradia, and we see a particular bird, and this is Morai, Ahsoka's spiritual guardian and something that appeared following the daughter's decision to revive her. And Morai's presence essentially means that while Thrawn may have escaped and that the two of them are now stranded, they are exactly where they need to be. That them being stranded is all part of the will of the Force. We see Shin take control of the nomads, and we then see Baylan standing on a statue which happens to depict the father, and standing next to the father is the son, and on the other side, headless, is the daughter. These three represent the gods of Mortis, with the son representing the dark side, the daughter the light, and the father in between. And this lets us know that there is much more to Paradia than we previously realized, and if you take note of what the father is pointing towards, in the distance we can see lights flashing, likely marking Baylan's end destination. Thrawn arrives on Dathomir, which will now likely be the starting point of his campaign. We then see Ezra arrive and reunite with Hera and Chopper as well. Back on Paradia, Ahsoka and Sabine have a heart-to-heart, and for a brief moment, Sabine and Ahsoka sense the presence of Anakin, who smiles as he watches over them. A real heartwarming end to the entire series. So that was the last episode of the Ahsoka show, and wow, what an enjoyable ride. The show really goes a long way in setting up things for the future, and with now two diverging plotlines, it does leave us to wonder how all this will come together in the future. Anyways, that's all for this video and this breakdown. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I'm the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.